She was skin and bones when I found her. Now, she's the most beautiful woman in the Wild West. The sun was lowering behind the hills, casting long shadows across the flat land and turning the air colder by the hour. Dust swirled low to the ground, catching in the brittle grass and between the cracks in the dirt. Nothing green had grown here in months, not since the last bad drought and the short spring that followed. The town of Grafton's Hollow sat 5 miles back in the haze, quiet, thin, and almost forgotten. Eli Cutter kept the reins loose in his hands as he rode the wagon down the slope, scanning the dry creek bed below. He wasn't rushing. He never did. The wheels creaked, one of them pulling a little to the left since the axle had started bowing, but he hadn't fixed it yet. He told himself he would after the fencing was done. He wasn't out here for sport, wasn't hunting, wasn't looking for company, just checking the far line where the last of his land met the river's edge. Coyotes had been nosing near the fencing again, tracks near the barn last week. He wanted to see if they'd been down at the water, maybe sniffing after something. But what he found wasn't an animal. At first, he thought it was a coat, maybe a blanket caught on a bush. It was too still to be alive. He pulled the wagon to a stop, climbed down without speaking, and made his way toward it slowly, eyes narrowed. His boots crunched over the dry river rocks. The air smelled faintly of old water, rotting leaves, and sunburned soil. When he got closer, he saw it was a person, a woman. She was lying face down in the weeds near the edge of the bank. Her legs were scraped up, dress torn around the hem, skin pale like she hadn't seen daylight proper in days. One arm was tucked under her, the other twisted slightly outward, palm open. Eli stopped a few feet away. His first thought was that she was dead. There was a tightness in his chest that came with it, old, familiar quiet. He'd seen death enough to recognize its stillness. But then he saw her back rise, slow, unsteady. Barely anything. He crouched and looked at her face. Dark hair tangled, cheek pressed into the dirt. She had a cut near her lip, bruises along the side of her jaw. Her eyes opened when she felt his shadow. Just barely. She blinked once, then looked away. He didn't speak right away. She was young, mid-20s maybe, thin, far too thin. He could see the shape of her spine through the dress. It wasn't the weather that had done this to her. Something else had. "You hurt?" he asked, voice low, steady. No answer. Her breathing was uneven. He watched her a few seconds longer, trying to gauge whether she was about to pass out or run. She didn't move at all, just kept her eyes on the dirt like she was trying not to exist. Eli stood, walked back to the wagon, and grabbed a blanket from the bed. It was clean, one of the few he had left from his wife. He hesitated, thought about the stories this might bring if anyone saw her at his place. Then again, people in town didn't ask him much anymore. When he returned, he laid the blanket on the ground next to her. "You can stand. I'll help you up," he said. Not soft, not harsh, just clear. She shifted slightly. Her fingers dug into the soil like she wanted to try. But her arms shook, legs didn't hold, and she slumped again. Eli didn't move right away. Watched her try again. She was stubborn. That much was clear. She didn't ask for help, didn't speak. After the third try, he stepped in, hooked his arms under hers, slow and careful. She didn't fight, but she didn't help either. She was limp, bones and skin, lighter than she should have been. Her head dropped against his chest. He carried her up to the wagon and lifted her in. She held the blanket now, wrapped it around herself without being told. She didn't cry, didn't ask who he was or where they were going. She just sat there, quiet, watching the ground as he climbed up beside her. They rode back without a word. The sky dimmed fast. Cold crept in through the wagon bed. The road was rough and uneven, lined with brush and broken fence posts. The silence was deep, but it didn't feel empty. Eli kept his eyes forward. He knew better than to speak when someone wasn't ready. Eli Cutter, age 48, wasn't a lawman. Not anymore. Used to be a gunsmith in town. Married young. Had a boy. Lost both in the same winter. Pneumonia first, then fever. That was over a decade ago. After that, he sold the shop, took what was left of the money, and bought a piece of land out near the canyon bend. Didn't go to church. Didn't drink. Just kept the land going, barely. Fenced it himself. Worked it alone. What he wanted now wasn't much. to keep the place from falling apart, to get through one more season without losing something else. The house wasn't much to look at. One room, patched roof, old porch with a board missing. The barn leaned southeast. The well had a cracked stone lip. He helped her down again, steadier this time. She took a step, then paused, gripping the wagon rail. Her hands were scraped raw at the knuckles. Her feet were bare. Inside, the cabin smelled like dry wood and iron. He'd swept the place that morning. It didn't matter. The dust still settled overnight. He pointed to the cot in the far corner. "You can rest there. Water's in the tin by the stove." She nodded. No words. Just walked to it, wrapped the blanket tighter, and sat with her back against the wall. She watched him with her eyes, not her head. Eli moved slow, lit the stove, put on a kettle, took down a jar of dry broth mix. It wasn't much, but it was warm. She'd need warmth. He thought about asking her name, where she came from, what the hell she was doing out here, near dead. But he didn't. People ran from things. He'd seen it before. Whatever she was running from, she wasn't ready to say. She came to the table when he set down the tin cup, drank slow, ate even slower. Her hands shook a little when she brought the spoon up. Her eyes stayed low. Every few minutes she'd glance up, quick, just to see where he was. Eli didn't sit, just leaned against the counter and kept an eye on the stove. Afterward, she didn't speak, just stood, took the blanket, and returned to the cot. Lay down curled, facing the wall. Eli stood there a minute, listened to the wind outside. He put another log on the fire, checked the door, sat in the corner chair. Didn't speak, didn't sleep. He stayed up long after the room went still, watching the flame in the stove, listening to her breath. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, but she'd made it this far. And now, for whatever reason, she was here. And that made her his responsibility. At least for now. By the time morning light pushed through the cracks in the wooden shutters, the room had gone quiet again. Stove burned low, air colder than it should have been for late autumn. Eli was already awake. Hadn't really slept. His eyes were open in the chair, boots flat on the floor, one hand resting near the rifle propped beside him. Not out of fear, but habit. His back ached from the way he'd sat, but he didn't move yet. The woman, still wrapped in the same blanket, was curled on the cot with her back to the room, knees pulled tight. She hadn't stirred much during the night. Once or twice she shifted, let out a breath that sounded half like a sob, but never loud enough to say for sure. He'd waited to hear her breathing change, to know she was truly asleep, before he allowed himself to close his eyes. Eli stood slowly, stretching one shoulder at a time, then reached for the kettle. It was cold. He poured what was left into the basin near the stove and refilled it with fresh water from the barrel beside the door. As he worked, he glanced at her, not in suspicion, not in curiosity, just checking, still breathing, still here. He stoked the fire again, got the stove warming, and pulled down a small cloth bag of cornmeal. Breakfast wouldn't be much, just mush and wheat coffee, but it would be hot, and that was what mattered. She stirred as the scent began to spread through the room. Slow groggy. Her hand moved under the blanket. Then she turned on her back and blinked up at the ceiling, like she wasn't quite sure where she was. Her eyes moved to him next. She didn't startle, didn't sit up fast or grab at the blanket. She just stared for a moment, then eased herself upright, wincing as she did. Her hands pressed into her thighs, and for a second she looked like she might say something. But no words came. Eli spoke first. "There's water there, next to the basin. You can wash up if you want." She gave a small nod. Didn't move yet. He didn't push. The silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't the kind that begged to be filled. It just was. He set 2 tin bowls on the table, spooned the thick cornmeal into both. She stood, slower than before, and made her way to the table barefoot. Her steps were cautious, not from fear of him, at least not now, but like her legs still weren't sure they belonged to her. She sat without a word and picked up the spoon with the same hesitance she'd had the night before. She ate slower than he did. She watched him between bites, not in distrust, but with the eyes of someone trying to figure out where exactly she'd landed. He let her look. He didn't offer comfort, didn't smile, just finished his bowl, wiped his mouth, and took a sip of coffee. Then, without looking at her, he said, "What's your name?" A long pause. Her shoulders shifted. Then, Nora, she said it like it didn't belong to her anymore. He gave a slight nod, not pushing further, just committed it to memory. Nora, I'm Eli. She didn't respond. Just set the spoon down and folded her hands around the tin bowl, holding what little warmth was left in it. He waited another moment before asking the second thing on his mind. You run from someone? That time, she flinched. Just barely. But it was there. Her jaw locked, and she dropped her eyes to the bowl. I walked, she said. For a long time. He watched her. Waited. She didn't say more. Eli didn't ask again. If she wanted to lie, she would have. But that answer was the truth, or at least the part she was ready to share. He stood and picked up both bowls, rinsed them at the basin, then dried them with a square of muslin cloth. He worked without needing to think about it. That was how his mind stayed clear, by moving his hands. When he turned back, she was still sitting at the table. You don't have shoes, he said. She looked down at her feet like she hadn't noticed. No. He stepped to the corner and pulled out a crate from under the cabinet. Dug through it, came up with an old pair of leather boots. The stitching was worn, the laces frayed, but they were clean and still held together. Try these, he said, setting them down beside her chair. She didn't reach for them, not right away, just stared at them like she didn't trust the offer. Then, slowly, she took them, pulled them on with effort. They were too big, but she didn't say so. He moved to the back window, checked the yard. The fence line looked steady. A few crows in the dry patch of field. Barn still holding. He rubbed his jaw, then turned back to her. You can stay a day or two. Rest. Eat. After that, you decide if you're leaving. She didn't look surprised. Just nodded. You'll help while you're here, he added. There's always work. Another nod. That was enough. Later that morning, while Eli checked the barn siding and hauled feed for the mule, Nora stood near the porch, broom in hand. He hadn't asked her to sweep. She just found it beside the door, gripped it awkwardly for a moment, then began pushing dust off the planks in slow, careful strokes. She moved like she was used to working, but not used to being allowed to do it freely. Her eyes flicked up every few minutes, checking his shape in the distance. Not for fear, more like awareness. Like she wasn't sure if the work was hers to do or something he'd take away. Eli kept his distance, gave her space. She needed that more than anything, space where no one touched her, no one demanded, no one watched too close. He remembered how long it took to relearn silence as safety. Inside, that afternoon, he fixed the broken drawer in the corner. She watched from her place on the cot, quiet, still holding the blanket sometimes like she didn't want to let go of the one thing that had covered her since she was found. She didn't ask questions, didn't pry. But when he went to check the woodpile before sundown, she followed him out, 6 steps behind, silent the whole way. That night, she stayed at the table longer, watched the fire, ate a little more than before. Still no full story, still no explanation. But she stayed inside when night fell, didn't ask where he'd go. And when Eli took the chair again, rifle by his side, listening to the stove crackle low and steady, he heard her breathing smooth out behind him. Not because she was safe, not yet, but because, for the first time in a long time, nobody was coming through the door. And sometimes that was enough. Night passed without interruption. When dawn broke, pale and sharp, the world outside was dusted in the season's first snow, thin, white flakes settling on the dry grass and cracked boards of the porch. Eli stood at the window, rifle gone, coat cinched tight. He watched the flakes gather on the fence rails and on the mule's back as it stamped its feet in the corral. Inside, Nora still slept. Her blanket was piled around her like a nest. Eli hesitated before waking her. He knew the cold could bite the marrow. He crossed the room, knelt beside the cot, and set a cup of hot water by her hand. She stirred, eyelids fluttering, then sat up, rubbing her temples. He didn't ask if she was cold. She looked in her eyes. Instead, he said, "Stove's lit. Coffee's on." She nodded, swung her legs over the cot, and rose cautiously. Her feet were cold against the floor, so he held out the leather boots he'd patched the night before. They were lined with old cloth, warm enough for walking through snow. She slipped them on without a word. They moved through the cabin in silence, but their steps fell into a quiet rhythm. He tending the stove and kettle, she moving to the basin to wash her face in the steamy water, revealing faint bruises around her jaw and wrists that hadn't faded. She caught his gaze for a moment, then looked away. Over coffee and leftover mush, he answered the question he knew she would ask next. Snow won't stay past noon. Ground's too dry. He spoke evenly, as if this kind of morning was ordinary. Your place, you built it? She asked finally, voice husky. He nodded between sips. 15 years. Bought it after my family died. Needed to vanish. She set her cup down. I don't ask why you vanished. Her voice was low, careful. Thank you for this. She didn't need to explain more. He understood vanishing. When the bowls were cleared, he threw on his duster and led her outside. They walked the perimeter together, her in woolen shirt beneath the dress, hands tucked into pockets, watching her breath fog in the air. He pointed out broken fence rails and sagging posts. Coyotes come at night. Deer leave hoof prints in the barnyard. She listened, absently tracing lines in the snow with her boot. Her fingers brushed at the scar on her wrist, half hidden by the shirt sleeve. He noticed, but didn't comment. Back at the barn, he opened the door. The mule pressed forward, stampeding dust motes and hay. He motioned for her to take the pitchfork. Feed him first, he said. Then we'll check the trap line by the canyon. She took the fork with steady fingers and lifted a flake-soft heap of hay into the mule's stall. The animal nickered, grateful and warm. As she worked, she glanced up at him, as if testing whether this chore was hers to share or if he'd take over. He stayed back, letting her find her place. After the feed, he handed her a handful of short lengths of rope. Repair this, he said, pointing to a torn section of fence. Hold the boards steady. She knelt in the snow, hands brushing coldwood, and laced the rope around 2 posts. Her knuckles whitened. He watched the way she paused, looking over the canyon's edge, rock face falling straight into shadow. So, she said, voice low, you trap here. He looked down at her hands. For pays. Keeps the shop stocked. He didn't mention the gunsmith bench gathering dust in the corner of the cabin. She tied knots tight. My husband, he hunted. New traps. She didn't say more. He didn't ask. They worked side by side as the sun climbed. Neither spoke again until they reached the canyon's lip. He lifted the flap of a gray canvas bag and showed her 3 marten skins, soft, silvery in the weak sunlight. Good pelts, he said. Can trade in Grafton's Hollow. She traced the fur with her finger. I could learn. He met her eyes, saw the hunger beneath the thin smile. Knew better than to promise teaching. Trust had to earn itself. He nodded once. By midday, the snow had begun to melt into slush. They returned to the cabin, boots wet, hair damp at the collar. Inside, the stove burned low. Nora peeled off the wet layers and draped them over the back of a chair. Eli mixed flour and water for bread, flat loaves pressed by hand. She watched him knead, arms flexing, scars on his forearms. When he shaped the dough, he offered her a small piece. She dipped her fingers in flour and tasted it. She closed her eyes at the warmth and salt. They ate in silence, sharing the bread and thin broth. The questions hovered. Who was she running from? Why did she stop here? Could he trust her at the traps? Could she trust him not to send her away? He answered by setting a second chair closer. She sat, their shoulders nearly touching. It was enough for now. That afternoon, he showed her the single rifle he carried, how to clean it, load it, and rest it on the fence rail for sighting. Her hand shook as she loaded the cartridges, but her eyes were steady when she aimed. She fired once into the open field, smoke curling around the barrel. The shot sounded sudden and loud, echoing off the distant hills. She looked at him, heart pounding. He nodded. Not a bad shot. She exhaled, relief and surprise on her face. He closed the action and handed it back. When you're ready. She slid the rifle into her lap. Didn't say more, but her posture changed stronger. As dusk fell, they walked back to the cabin with 2 rabbits hanging from rope over his shoulder. Their hands almost brushed in passing. Both noticed. Neither pulled away. Inside, by lantern light, Eli skinned and gutted 1 rabbit at the table, explaining each cut while she watched, fascinated and quiet. He kept talking through the process, how to use every part, how nothing should go to waste. She listened, nodding, absorbing every word. When the stew was simmering, he wiped his hands and looked at her. For the first time, there was a question in the air that needed answering, and no silence could fill it. She met his gaze, hesitated, then said, "I came from the east. A farm." I ran because her voice broke slightly. My husband didn't stop. He nodded, offering neither pity nor judgment, just understanding. She looked down at her hands. I stopped because I was too tired to keep running. The fire crackled. Snow melted against the window panes. Eli gestured to the empty chair. "Sit." She did. He ladled the stew into tin bowls and set one before her. They ate together in that small room, two souls learning trust through warmth and shared labor, each filling the gaps in the other's story without a single grand confession. And in that moment, the questions that lingered grew fewer, because staying, they both knew, was the answer. The morning came with the slow sound of rain on the roof. Not heavy, just steady enough to dampen the dirt and soften the world. The light through the cabin windows was gray, low, and made everything look quieter than usual. Eli stood at the stove, grinding beans in the old tin mill, turning the handle slow. He didn't rush through Sundays. Behind him, Nora was folding her blanket. She moved easily now, the stiffness in her limbs mostly gone. Her cheeks had filled in a little. The hollowness around her eyes had lessened, though it still flickered back in at times, like a memory she couldn't help but wear. She hadn't asked to leave, hadn't brought it up since the night she told him why she ran. That silence said more than any promise could have. Eli poured 2 mugs of coffee, set them down, then sat across from her at the table. The rain picked up outside, pinging off the roof, pooling near the porch. He sipped once, then looked at her. "You ever been to Grafton's Hollow?" She shook her head. "It's not much. Mercantile, smithy, stable, church that don't open most Sundays." He paused. "If you're going to stay, you'll need things. Soap, thread, maybe warmer clothes before winter starts proper." She hesitated. "You want me to go with you?" He looked down into his cup. "Not today. Too wet. But soon." She nodded. "All right." It was the first time either of them said anything about her staying. Not her recovering, not her resting, staying. After breakfast, Eli brought in the tools from the shed. The roof over the porch had 2 boards rotted through. The rain was getting in, and it had soaked the steps by nightfall. He was hammering into new planks when he heard her behind him, pulling on his old coat with sleeves too long for her arms. She held out the nails. "I can help," she said. He gave her a long look, then nodded. "Hold the boards steady." They worked without talking much. When she slipped slightly on the wet step, he caught her by the elbow. It wasn't romantic or charged. It was instinct. But something passed between them in that moment. The kind of moment that's easy to miss if you're not paying attention. She steadied herself. "Thanks. Careful up here." Wood soft under the weight. When they finished, she stepped back and looked at the patchwork they'd made together. It wasn't perfect, but it'd hold. "You've been here alone a long time," she said quietly. "Long enough," he replied. "Don't you miss people?" Eli was quiet for a moment, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I miss what they used to be, not who they became." She didn't ask what he meant. That afternoon, while the rain softened the fields, Eli lit the lamp early. The cabin felt smaller in the wet cold. He pulled a tin from the shelf, old letters tied in string, stained at the corners. He laid them out on the table one by one. Nora watched from her chair, not speaking. "My boy liked to draw," Eli said, unwrapping a folded piece of paper. The pencil lines were faded. A crooked horse, a stick figure cabin, smoke rising from a chimney that looked more like a tree stump. "He died young," she asked. Eli nodded. 6. Pneumonia took him. Wife followed a month later. After that, I packed up and came out here. Nora didn't speak, but her eyes softened. "You got anyone left?" he asked, voice even. She looked at the fire. "No. Mama died before I married. Father left when I was small." A pause. "I married a man who didn't like silence. And I was a quiet girl." He understood. He didn't press further. That night, she asked if she could cook. It surprised him. He stepped aside without a word. She washed her hands, pulled her hair back with a strip of cloth, and moved around the small kitchen like it wasn't borrowed anymore. Rabbit stew again, but richer this time. She added dried sage and a bit of salt pork from the shelf. The smell filled the room. They ate slowly. The rain had stopped. Outside, the wind had stilled. "You ever fix that saddle in the barn?" she asked. "Been meaning to. I can stitch leather. Used to mend boots." Eli gave a slow nod. "Then it's yours." She smiled, small and quiet but real. The first one he'd seen that didn't look like it hurt to wear. Later, before turning in, he stood at the door. Looked out at the dark, at the field, the fence line. Everything was still. Behind him, Nora was sweeping the floor. She looked up. "What is it?" "Just watching. Some nights, I still expect someone to come." "You mean trouble?" He shook his head. "No, just someone." She didn't ask who. Didn't need to. She crossed the room, picked up the second blanket from the shelf, and handed it to him. "You should sleep on the cot tonight." "I'll take the chair." He shook his head. "I'll take the floor. You keep the cot. You shouldn't sleep on the floor in your own home." "I've slept worse." Her eyes met his. Then she nodded once. "All right, we'll trade next time." He didn't argue. As he lay on the floor, coat rolled beneath his head, he listened to the sound of the fire, the rhythm of her breathing, the slow settling of the house. No questions that needed answering. No doors waiting to burst open. No footsteps in the dark. Just rain-soaked wood, 2 chairs, shared bread, and the slow build of something not yet named. The morning came dry and cold, the kind of windless silence that hung over the valley before winter dug in for real. Eli hitched the mule to the wagon after breakfast while Nora filled a sack with eggs and pelts to trade. She moved differently now, shoulders squarer, hands more certain. She didn't ask if she was going. She just wrapped the scarf around her neck and climbed onto the seat beside him. It was the first time she'd left the property since he found her. The road to Grafton's Hollow was narrow and rutted from past rains. Trees lined the bends, bare and brittle. Nora kept one hand tight on the rail, and her eyes fixed ahead, jaw set. Her body wasn't tense with fear, but there was something braced in her, like she was waiting for the world to remind her she didn't belong in it. Eli noticed, didn't say a word. He hadn't been in a town in over 2 months. It was the kind of place where stories stuck longer than people. They'd remember his face, the one who'd buried a wife and child, who never took communion, who showed up silent and left the same. He never asked for help, never gave more than was necessary. He liked it that way. Grafton's Hollow sat low between the hills, mostly made of sagging buildings with false fronts and chimneys that leaned wrong. The Mercantile's roof was patched with tin, and the livery had one stall burned out from last year's lightning storm. The church stood at the far end like an afterthought. They pulled in slow. A few folks looked up, old men in dust-covered hats, a pair of women sweeping their porch. Eli nodded once, didn't stop the mule until they reached the feed store. He climbed down first, tied off the reins. Nora stayed seated. "Don't need to talk to no one," he said. "Just stay close. If anyone asks, you work the ranch." "That's enough." She nodded once, then stepped down beside him. Inside the Mercantile, the floorboards creaked under their boots. The shopkeeper, Ellis Boone, looked up from behind the counter. He was a man in his 60s, white hair, sharp eyes, too used to listening more than speaking. "Morning, Cutter," Boone said. His eyes drifted to Nora. "Got company." Eli didn't answer right away. He set the pelts on the counter. "Martin's," he said, "clean-skinned. That and 6 eggs." Boone reached forward, fingers brushing the fur. "You trade for store credit or coin?" "Credit." Boone nodded slowly, eyes cutting back to Nora. "She's staying with you?" Eli didn't blink. "She's working the ranch." That was enough. Boone didn't ask more. Nora didn't speak, didn't look at anyone too long. She kept her posture still, her hands tucked under the shawl. But her eyes moved, tracking the aisles, the windows, the door. Always measuring distance. Always ready. They took sugar, flour, salt, a tin of coffee, thread, and a pair of men's gloves she could cut down size. Before they left, Boone leaned over the counter and tapped twice. Word goes fast in a town like this. You know that. Eli looked him in the eye. That's your concern? Boone shook his head. No, sir. Just reminding you what town is. They left without another word. Outside, Nora exhaled like she'd held her breath the whole time. As they reached the wagon, she spoke. They know something's off. Eli lifted the sack into the back. They know enough. That's all. Boone. He was watching me. He watches everyone. She paused, her hand gripping the wagon rail. They'll talk, won't they? Let them. Talking's all they know how to do. They didn't stop anywhere else. Not the blacksmith. Not the post. He didn't want her in that place longer than she needed to be. As they rode out, she finally let herself look back at the buildings, the people watching from behind curtains or porch rails. How long until they stop wondering? She asked. Eli's eyes stayed on the road. They never do, but they stopped saying it out loud. She was quiet for a long time after that. Halfway home, they stopped under a cottonwood where the creek used to run strong. He handed her a tin of water and some bread. They sat on a fallen log and ate without speaking, the air cold enough to see their breath. After a while, Nora said, "Back there, when he asked if I was staying with you, I felt like I was trespassing." Eli looked at her. "You're not." She stared ahead at the horizon, at the hills faded blue in the distance. "I never thought I'd end up with someone who didn't want something in return." Eli wiped his hands on a rag, then stood. "I want the fences held, the mule fed, and peace under my roof. That's it." Her lips twitched like she almost smiled. "That's fair." They returned to the ranch as the light bent westward. Nora unpacked the sack while Eli checked the barn doors. Inside, everything smelled like wood smoke and fresh flour. The world had changed a little, though nothing looked different. After supper, while she mended a seam on the coat he always wore, she asked something that had been unspoken until now. "You ever think about leaving?" He shook his head. "Nothing out there for me." She nodded slowly. "Same." There wasn't a bond between them yet. Not the kind people expected, but there was something quieter, the kind that settled instead of struck, a kind of stillness that made space. Later that night, when he stepped outside to check the sky, Nora brought the lantern to the porch and hung it on the hook above the door. A small gesture, but when he noticed, it burned through the night, warm light casting through the cracks in the wood, until they both slept. Not because it was safe, but because they weren't alone anymore. The air turned sharp by the middle of the week. Frost touched the tips of the grass before dawn and held there long after sunrise. The wind started pushing harder from the north, warning of the first hard freeze. Eli chopped firewood in the early hours, shirt sleeves rolled up, breath rising in front of him. Nora stacked the pieces near the cabin wall, quieter than usual, but moving with a steadiness that said she meant to stay ahead of the cold. That morning, she caught him glancing at the old gunsmith bench in the corner of the barn. Dust thick across the top, tools untouched for years. She didn't ask, just studied the shape of it with quiet curiosity. He didn't offer anything. Not yet. Later, while she patched the shoulder seam on one of his shirts, he stepped in from the porch holding a small envelope, creased, dirt-smudged, with no return name. He held it like it might burn. "Found this nailed to the post at the edge of the property," he said. Nora stood slowly, took it, turned it over once. Her fingers froze before opening it. Inside was a scrap of paper. 5 words, written in uneven pencil. "You can't run forever, girl." She stared at it. The blood drained from her face. She didn't say a word. Eli watched her carefully. "You recognize the writing?" She nodded once. "His cousin. Dean. You sure?" "I've seen enough. He used to leave notes like this around the house. Why didn't speak fast enough? When I missed something." Her voice had gone dry. She folded the paper and set it on the table. "They know I'm here." Eli stood still, thinking. Could be they passed through town. "Heard something. I didn't talk to anyone." "You didn't need to. People talk on your behalf when they're bored enough." She looked up at him. "You think they'll come?" "I think if someone wanted to make a mess, they'd have done it already. This was just a warning. A test." He leaned on the counter. "But I'll be ready either way." She rubbed her wrists beneath the sleeves. "I shouldn't come here. You didn't cause this. They'll think you're hiding me." "I am." He said it so simply she stopped breathing for a second. She stared at him, searching for something, maybe fear, maybe reluctance. She didn't find it. "Don't need to be afraid of me, Nora," he said. "And I don't scare easy." She sat down in the chair by the stove, hands on her knees. "They don't forget. Not when they lose control of something they think they own. I don't forget either, Eli said. I remember everything. That night, Eli pulled the rifle from the wall, cleaned it at the table. The sound of the oilcloth, the soft scrape of the boar brush, filled the silence. Nora sat nearby, sewing the last patch onto the second pair of gloves. Neither of them said anything, but the room felt different now. A line had been drawn. After the rifle was reassembled, Eli set it down gently and looked over. How long's it been since you ran? 43 days. You've been counting? Every morning. He nodded. That made sense. They left bruises where folks wouldn't see them, she added. Neck, ribs, back of the legs. Said I was too quiet to trust. Like I owed them noise. Eli looked at her for a long time. Not with pity, with anger. But it was the kind of anger that didn't rush. The kind that sat deep in the bones and waited for the right time to act. They show up here, he said, voice flat. They don't leave standing. Nora didn't flinch. I don't want them dead. I didn't say I'd kill them. But they won't take you back. She nodded once. That was enough. The next day, he rode into Grafton's Hollow alone. Needed supplies, wire, flour, more oil. But mostly, he needed to listen. The store was half full. Boone behind the counter. A man at the stove with a crooked back. Another near the window reading last week's newspaper. Boone kept his voice low. You see that message. Eli didn't pretend. I saw it. Stranger in town 2 nights ago. Didn't give a name. Bought whiskey, smoked behind the stable, left before daylight. Had a face like he was looking for something. Eli stared at him. What else? Rode a bay horse. Looked lean. Tired. Said he had family out east. Eli tightened his jaw. He say the name Dean? Boone shook his head. Didn't say much at all. But he wasn't just passing through. I've seen the look before. Eli paid and left without another word. At the ranch, Nora had drawn a line of ash across the doorway. An old habit, maybe, or something she picked up long ago. He didn't question it. He handed her the extra tin of cartridges. Load these into the belt. Keep it near the cot. You think it's him? I think if it's not now, it will be soon. She worked in silence, hands steady. Later, after supper, she asked, Why'd you really stop when you saw me? That day, at the river. Eli took a long moment before answering. I'd buried too many people to pretend you weren't real. She nodded. I thought I was going to die out there. I wasn't scared. I just didn't care anymore. You care now. Her eyes didn't leave his. Yes. Outside, the cold settled in. Harder now. The ground would start freezing soon. Fences would stiffen. Water would need hauling before sunup. But inside the cabin, the fire burned hotter than it had in weeks. Not just for heat, because now they both knew what it meant to stay, and what it might take to keep doing so. The frost stayed all day now. Water in the trough froze over before noon. Eli kept the stove burning hot, but the cold still pushed through the cracks in the walls. He patched what he could with cloth and mud, but the wind found its way in anyway. Nora wore 2 layers most mornings, one of his old flannel shirts beneath her dress, and carried the lantern out to the barn before sunrise, without needing to be told. Eli watched her work. Not just what she did, but how she moved. She no longer flinched at sudden sounds. No longer hesitated to ask where the spare nails were, or how to oil the hinges on the barn door. She'd begun to hum sometimes, soft and low under her breath. It wasn't cheerful, but it wasn't silence either. And that was something. But Eli also knew the quiet wouldn't last. That afternoon, he noticed smoke on the far ridge. Too far for a fire to be accidental. Too close for comfort. He stood outside the barn, one hand shading his eyes, the other resting loosely on the rifle slung across his shoulder. The smoke was thin, controlled. A campfire, maybe. Whoever it was, they were watching. That was clear enough. He stepped inside. Nora was brushing down the mule, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Rider's back, he said, about a mile out, camped near the ridge. She paused mid-stroke. You sure it's him? No one camps up that way unless they're looking for something. Or someone. She stared at the barn wall for a moment, then hung up the brush. Do you want me to leave? No. If they threaten you, they won't get close enough to. She nodded. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them in her pockets. I can handle a rifle, she said, if you teach me how to sight it proper. You will, Eli said. Tonight. They spent the evening behind the barn, where the wind couldn't reach. Eli set up bottles on the fence posts and handed her the Winchester. She was nervous at first, not of the weapon, but of getting it wrong. Like failure meant something worse than embarrassment. He adjusted her grip. "You're not pulling a trigger to win anything," he said. "You're doing it to stop a man from walking forward." She nodded, bracing the rifle to her shoulder. She exhaled once, steady, then fired. The first shot hit low. The second cracked the neck of the bottle. She didn't smile, just looked at him, waiting for the next instruction. "You're steady," he said. "You don't flinch." "I had to learn not to," she said. They trained until the dark swallowed the field. Then they went inside. He cleaned the rifle while she folded the laundry she'd done earlier. She didn't ask what would happen next. She already knew. That night, neither of them slept. Eli sat near the door, boots on, coat draped over the chair, rifle resting on his knee. Nora lay on the cot with the lantern still lit. She wasn't crying. She wasn't speaking, but her eyes stayed open for hours. When a knock came just before dawn, it wasn't loud. Just 2 knocks. Then silence. Eli stood without sound, motioned for Nora to stay low. She slid from the cot and crouched behind the wood stove. He opened the door slow. A man stood in the yard. Not Dean. Older. Thick coat, brown hat pulled low. His horse stood behind him, reins loose. He wasn't holding a weapon, but Eli could see the bulge under the coat. "You Eli Cutter?" the man asked. Eli didn't answer, just looked him over. "I'm not here to cause harm. Just passing word." "Go ahead," Eli said. The rifle stayed in his hand. The man looked past him, like trying to see into the cabin. "Dean's 2 days behind me. He's not alone. 2 other men riding with him. Armed. Mean. Said he aims to take back what's his." "She's not his," Eli said. The man nodded. "Didn't think so, but I figured you'd want warning." "What do you want in return?" "Nothing. Just didn't sit right, the way he talked. Thought you deserved a chance to be ready." Eli studied him. The man didn't shift under the weight of his stare. "You got a name?" "Call me Price. Don't plan to stay." Eli nodded once. "Then you best ride before light hits." "I already am." The man tipped his hat, walked back to his horse, mounted, and rode off without a look back. Eli closed the door, locked it, turned. Nora stood now, her hands clenched into fists. She'd heard everything. "They're coming," she said. "Yes." "And they won't walk away." "No," Eli said. "They won't." She stepped closer to the table, rested both hands flat on the wood. "I won't hide when they come." "You won't have to." They spent the day preparing. Eli walked the perimeter, reinforced the weakest points in the fencing, tied up the mule in the barn with enough feed and water for 2 days, set up a lantern on the porch that could be lit in seconds, cleaned both rifles, loaded the spare. Nora checked the pantry, prepared meals that could be eaten cold, packed a small sack of essentials, and placed it near the door, just in case. She didn't speak much. Neither did he. As night came, they stood together by the window, watching the dark roll in. "They won't knock this time," she said. "No," Eli said. "They'll come fast. Mean to scare. Mean to break." "They don't know me anymore," she said. He looked at her. The way she stood now, firm, still, face quiet but ready. She wasn't skin and bones. "Not anymore." "They don't know me either," Eli said. The frost clung to the earth like it meant to stay. Every surface was stiff with cold, brittle, and unmoving. Nora was up before first light, standing by the window with a rifle in her hands, eyes fixed on the horizon. Her sleeves were rolled down, hair pulled back. She didn't say a word. Eli finished tying the final brace across the back door. He'd reinforced the windows with spare boards the night before and dug 2 shallow firing trenches, one just off the porch, one behind the barn. They both knew the land too well now to waste time guessing. If Dean and his men came, they'd come down the south ridge, where the trees thinned. That was the only place someone could ride in full speed without snapping an ankle or spooking the horse. Nora loaded the rifle herself, every round set with care. She didn't flinch at the sound of the chamber locking shut. Eli watched her a moment, then moved beside her. "If they come, you wait until they dismount. Don't shoot early. Don't shoot to scare." "I won't. You stay behind the stove unless I tell you otherwise." She looked at him. We're past that. He didn't argue. The morning dragged. Every creak of the cabin settled heavier than it should have. A hawk circled above once, then vanished westward. Around midday, the mule in the barn grew restless. Not spooked, but alert. Eli stepped out to the porch, rifle slung low, eyes on the tree line. Dust rose. 3 riders. Slow, steady, taking their time. That told him what he needed to know. They weren't in a hurry. They thought they had the upper hand. One in front, broader than the others. Dean. He hadn't changed much. Same heavy coat. Same broken nose. Same way of leaning forward in the saddle, like everything in front of him already belonged to him. The 2 men behind him looked less sure. Both younger. Both armed. Eli stepped off the porch and walked to the edge of the yard. Stopped by the old fence line. He didn't raise the rifle, just waited. Dean saw him and smiled. "Well, hell," he said, pulling the reins. "Didn't think you'd be the kind to stand out in plain view." Eli said nothing. Dean dismounted, stretched his back. "Heard you took an astray. Thought I'd come bring her home." "She's not yours," Eli said. Dean chuckled. "She was. Long enough. She's not property." Dean's smile faded. "You don't know what she did. She left without a word. Took things that weren't hers. Money. My horse. And ran like a coward. You bring a horse with you now?" Eli asked. Dean narrowed his eyes. "Thought not." Behind Eli, the door to the cabin opened. Slow, deliberate. Nora stepped out with a rifle cradled in her arms. She didn't hide. She didn't lower her gaze. She walked up beside Eli and stood there, facing the men. Dean saw her and stopped smiling altogether. "You look well fed," he said. Nora said nothing. Eli cut her. Dean said, voice changing now, tight, sharp. "This ain't your fight." Eli shifted the rifle higher. "Then don't start it." Dean stepped forward once, but the sound of the rifle bolt sliding back stopped him cold. It was Nora. She had raised the rifle, steady and sure, aiming at his chest. Dean looked at her. "You wouldn't." Nora's voice was clear. "You don't get to own me anymore." The other 2 riders shifted, uncertain. One reached slowly for his holster. Eli raised his rifle. "Don't," he said. "I drop the first man who moves." Dean glanced at his men. "You really want blood over this?" "No one wants blood," Eli said. "But I'll spill it before I give her up." Nora didn't move. Didn't blink. Dean studied them. Looked at the land, the cabin, the rifles pointed back at him. He saw what he came for wasn't going to leave with him. Not this time. He spat in the dirt. She ain't worth the trouble. Nora didn't lower her gun. Dean turned back to his horse. Climbed up slow. Looked down at her one last time. "You run again," he said. "There won't be another warning." Eli stepped forward. "You cross this line again, you won't ride out." Dean's mouth twitched. Then he turned his horse. The others followed. They rode off at a steady pace. Not a retreat, just a recognition of something they hadn't expected. Resistance that didn't flinch. Eli watched them until the trees took them. He turned to Nora. She still held the rifle. "You all right?" he asked. Her arms trembled just a little. "Yeah, just. I didn't think it would feel like that." "Like what?" "Like it wasn't just fear anymore." He nodded. "That's how you know it's over." They didn't speak much that evening. Just went back to work. She swept the porch. He checked the traps out near the ridge. The air had that strange stillness that follows something heavy. No birds. No wind. That night, Eli didn't sit in the chair by the door. He sat beside her at the table. 2 cups. 1 lantern. The weight of the cabin lighter than it had ever been. She leaned back, arms crossed over her chest. "You still think I'll leave?" He looked at her. "Do you want to?" "No." "Then don't." Simple as that. Outside, the cold crept in again, but this time, neither of them felt it much. Because there was nothing left chasing them. Not anymore. Winter settled in early that year. Snow came in short, heavy bursts, and the air turned to ice in the mornings. The woodpile was stacked high along the cabin wall, a second stack already halfway gone. Inside, the stove never stopped burning. There were boots by the door, gloves drying near the hearth, and 2 mugs on the table instead of 1. No one had come back. Not Dean. Not his riders. Not a single note, not a whisper from town. Boone had passed a message through a passing traveler. Said word got around that Dean hadn't been seen since riding east out of Grafton's Hollow. No one was asking about Nora anymore. Whatever trouble she'd outrun had run out of breath. Nora didn't say much about it. Just listened when Eli told her, then went back to mending the ripped saddle strap she'd been working on. But something in her eased after that. Something deep in the way she stood. She no longer checked the window every time a branch cracked outside. Her shoulders dropped when she exhaled now. The silence between them had changed too. It wasn't guarded anymore. It was the kind that stayed in the room and kept it warm. Eli didn't need to speak often. She didn't need to ask permission for anything. She swept the floor when it needed sweeping. He sharpened the knives before she ever thought to use them. If the mule limped, she brought the salve before he said a word. One night, early in the season, she stayed outside long after supper, sitting on the edge of the porch, coat buttoned up to her chin. Eli stepped out to find her watching the snow fall. "You cold?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not anymore." He sat beside her. They watched the flakes drift through the stillness. "I've been thinking," she said after a while, "about what it means to belong to something." He waited. "I used to think it meant being claimed, being told where to go, what to say, what to be. I thought that was safety." She looked at him now. "But this is different." Eli nodded once. "It's staying. That's what it is." "You stayed," she said. "You did too." The snow fell soft across the roof, the porch rail, the grass below already blanketed in white. Inside, the lantern flickered through the window. A week later, she planted onions. It wasn't the season for planting, not even close. But she took a handful from the store sack, dug through the frozen dirt near the porch, and pressed them in anyway. Her hands were stiff with cold, but she smiled while she did it. Eli watched from the barn, wiping his hand with a rag. Didn't say a word. Just stepped back inside and brought out the old wide-brimmed hat she'd admired once in passing. He walked it out to her, held it out without a word. She stood, dirt on her palms, eyes on his hand. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the hat from him. It was the first time they'd touched since the riverbank. She put it on. He nodded once and turned back toward the cabin. That night, she made bread. Not just flat pan loaves, but real ones, risen, shaped, baked to a golden crust. The smell filled the whole house. Eli came in from hauling wood, stood at the door, and breathed it in. Something about it stopped him. Something small and quiet that hit deeper than it should have. He set the wood down, took off his coat, and sat across from her at the table. She placed a full slice in front of him, then sat without needing to be asked. He took a bite, chewed, swallowed. "This is good," he said. She smiled. "I had the time." Later, they sat on the porch as the sun dropped low behind the ridge. She leaned into the side of the chair nearest his. Not close enough to touch. Just near. He didn't move away. "I don't know what I am to you," she said. Eli stared out at the snow-covered field. "You're here," he said, "and I still light the lamp at night." She nodded, eyes misting. "I thought it would take something big to fix me," she said. "It doesn't," Eli said. "Just take someone not leaving." They didn't speak after that. Spring came slow. The thaw turned the field to mud. The onions she'd planted, half of them took. Not much, but enough. She tended them every morning. Eli built a second chair for the porch, sturdier than the first, meant to last. One afternoon, when the wind was soft and the sky clear, they rode into town together. She didn't follow behind him anymore. She walked beside him. No one stared. At the mercantile, Boone rang them up without a word of surprise. At the stable, Eli asked about seed for the summer crop. Nora picked up cloth for a new dress. When someone asked her name, she said Nora Cutter without flinching. No one corrected her. Eli didn't either. And when they came home, bags full, wagon light, she walked through the front door without hesitation, set the coffee tin on the shelf, and asked if he wanted stew or bread for supper. He said both. And for the first time since the day he found her near that riverbank, barefoot, skin and bone, afraid to speak, she laughed. There were no vows spoken, no handheld promises, no sudden kisses or dramatic confessions. Just two people staying. And for them, that was everything.
And that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for hanging out with Where Grit Meets Heart. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on what's next. See you soon.